HP Lion Pride P9. Hey, you. Daphne said, placing a hand on the shoulder of her boyfriend. Harry looked up into his girlfriend's concerned face and gave a soft smile. She had found him sitting in one of the large windows on the 5th floor overlooking the expansive grounds. She'd barely seen him in the past week, and if what Hermione and Neville had said were any clue, Harry had something heavy on his mind. You've been avoiding all of us since Halloween. Is everything all right? Yeah, I'm sorry, I've had a lot on my mind. Daphne smiled, thinking his friends knew him quite well. She gave his legs a light push so she could sit next to him. Neville and Hermione said you got in real late that night, and that you looked awful. Do you want to talk about it? Dumbledore took me to Godric's Hollow. Harry said flatly. Daphne's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then her face became concerned. Harry didn't look up as he continued. It was really overwhelming. I saw their graves, and then we went to the house where everything started. The funny thing is, I've never really thought about their graves before then. I mean, I've wondered occasionally, but I never gave it much thought. But actually seeing them, seeing their headstones. It gave me, I don't know, this kind of closure. I don't know how to put it into words. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you. Daphne said, taking his hand into hers. I can't even imagine what you must have been going through. I appreciate it. And, I'm sorry I've been ducking you guys. It's just, I really needed to sort through all this stuff, and I wanted to do it on my own. I wasn't trying to push you guys away again. I learned my lesson. Daphne gave his hand a gentle squeeze and she leaned him to kiss his lips gently. I'm glad, I didn't want to have to kick your butt again. And, it's okay if you need time, sometimes we all need a bit of space, especially with something like that. Just don't forget that we're here when you need us. We're not going anywhere. Harry smiled. I don't think my parents would be very proud of me if I tried to forget all of you. Thank you, for being patient and not pushing me. Anytime. Is there any chance you're done with your self-imposed isolation? Because, I really miss my boyfriend. Yeah. Harry smiled, looking up into her dark brown eyes for the first time. In fact, I was wondering if you'd like to go to Hogsmeade tomorrow? I think we're only going to get a couple of chances to go to the village this year, and I think I might do a bit of early Christmas shopping. I would love that. Daphne grinned. It's been a real long time since we got some time to ourselves. Maybe we could go to Madame Putifoot's. Harry's smile melted away into a look of severe horror. He'd heard many horror stories from other boys about the quaint little tea shop with its horrible pink walls, and its frilly little tablecloths, and the dodgy china. It was supposed to be a boy's worst nightmare. If you really want to, I guess. Harry, I'd rather be skinned alive than set foot in that place. Daphne grinned. Harry couldn't help but laugh as Daphne herself fell into his arms, laughing maniacally. It felt good to have this moment, as during the last week Harry's mind had been so full of the macabre. He now knew with certainty that Dumbledore was teaching him to hunt down Horcruxes himself. Harry believed that Dumbledore somehow knew he was not going to be alive much longer. He would let things slip during conversation that seemed unimportant by themselves, but together led Harry to believe that the headmaster was sick or something. However, he had sworn not to speak about any of what was spoken of during their lessons. He hadn't truly meant to avoid his friends, but he needed to sort all this information on his own, or he knew he would have betrayed the headmaster's trust and told all he knew to his friends. As it was, he felt horrible for not confiding in them. More and more, Harry felt they all needed to know all he knew for their safety, at the very least. "Listen, I really want to talk to you about something," Daphne said after she calmed herself down. "Do you remember a few weeks ago we caught Malfoy going through my things?" Daphne went on to explain her suspicions of her fellow Slytherin. Harry listened very carefully, and when she had finished, he sat still for a moment going over everything she had told him. "Neville agrees with me and Tracy, but Hermione thinks I'm being paranoid or something. To be honest, I'm not sure what to think. I mean, it all makes sense, but I just can't figure out why Voldemort would even want someone like Malfoy in his army, even with the fact that he's a pure-blood." "You don't believe me?" Daphne asked, starting to look hurt, but Harry reached out and gave her hand a squeeze. "I do believe you." He smiled. "I'm just trying to understand Voldemort's motives. Sometimes, I wish I still had that bit of him in me so I could see what he's up to." Daphne looked horror-struck. "You don't mean that?" Harry gave her a shrug, and Daphne slapped his shoulder. "Harry, that thing was killing you." "No, it wasn't. Dumbledore said it was barely hanging on to me. He said the basilisk's venom hurt it very badly. The truth is, I'm glad it's out of me, but I sometimes wonder if it was the right thing to do." He gave a weak shrug and smiled at her. Daphne's face remained upset. "Well, I'm glad that you got rid of it. It was the second smartest thing you've ever done." Harry gave a mirthful smile. "What was the first?" "Being with me, of course." Harry couldn't argue, and pulled her close for a long, deep kiss. Locked away on the 7th floor, Draco Malfoy sat before the broken vanishing cabinet, his frustration reaching dangerous levels. He'd spent close to 2 full months trying to repair this stupid vanishing cabinet. He had yet to strip away one single ward yet. Though he was quite sure that he was getting very close. The problem was that he was beginning to really feel exhausted by all of his efforts. This task was costing him physically and mentally. Every day, he felt weaker and more tired. His face was beginning to take on the sunken, drained look of someone who'd spent years in Azkaban. But he could not give up. Too much was at stake, including his own life. With every passing day, the tiniest sliver of doubt had begun to grow within Draco's mind. Several times, he had begun to wonder if he had made the right choice in pledging himself to the Dark Lord. But then he would return to the Slytherin common room, or take a meal in the Great Hall, and he would see Daphne Greengrass, or Harry Potter. And his blood would boil with rage at all the indignities he had suffered because of them, and his resolve would strengthen once again. And so, he kept at it. Coming to the room of requirement, and spending hours and hours trying to undo what other wizards had wrought. Thankfully, Draco was smart enough to have other plans in motion. Tomorrow, one of those plans was to be set in motion. Unfortunately, he would be unable to be there when it began, as the Transfiguration teacher had given him detention for not handing in homework. Not that he cared about something so trivial, but he could not afford to be kicked out of school now. So, he would have to trust his agents. Draco smiled to himself. He now had agents working for him. If the Dark Lord wasn't careful, he would have competition in a few years. Draco allowed himself to imagine his own rise to power in the Dark Lord's ranks, eventually becoming his second in command, only to betray and destroy the most powerful dark wizard in history. How the world would tremble at the wizard who destroyed the Dark Lord. Draco Malfoy. He couldn't help but smile at that. But then, reality came crashing back down on him. His life was forfeit if he didn't fix this cabinet, and kill Albus Dumbledore. Draco stood up again, and took a deep breath. He felt terribly weak and exhausted. He'd spent most of the afternoon here, trying to strip the first ward. He decided to try one last time before he gathered Crabbe, who was disguised as a first-year boy, and standing guard outside, and going to the kitchens for food. He was starving, and he was going to need all the energy he could get. Taking a few calming breaths and centering himself, Draco focused on what he wanted to happen. Raising his wand, and pointing it at the cabinet, he poured all his power into the spell. He felt the magic build up within his chest and course through his body, down his arm, and through his wand. Even without opening his eyes, he knew that the spell had finally worked. He could smell the crispness of air sizzling, and he could feel the outburst of energy as the first of the wards broke and fell away. Excitement filled Malfoy as he opened his eyes. Nothing appeared different, but he knew he'd accomplished something. Unfortunately, he was far too tired to check, and his legs buckled a bit. Draco sat down again, unable to keep from smiling at his success. The joy he felt was tempered by the fact that he knew the other wards would be just as difficult, if not more so. It had taken nearly a month just to break the first ward. He was exhausted, and he felt drained, as if his own magic was used up. But, he had done it. He had broken through the first ward. Now, he knew he could do it. He simply needed to be patient, and to take better care of himself. Draco stood weakly, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over him. He waited until it passed before shuffling towards the exit. Roast chicken sounds quite nice tonight, he thought. Draco left the room of requirement on shaky legs. He was going to get his chicken, and then he was going to sleep. He would serve his detention with McGonagall tomorrow, and then he'd come back and get started on the next damned ward. Harry awoke to Neville whistling, as he got himself ready to go to Hogsmeade. "I thought you might sleep through the weekend." Neville smiled, as Harry emerged from his closed bed curtains. "I was out kind of late last night with Daphne." "Did ya use that broom cupboard on the 5th floor?" Seamus asked, coming out of the bathroom. "The one across from the prefect's bathroom." "No, and it's none of your business, either." Harry scowled. "Forgive Seamus." Dean grinned, putting on his shoes. For some reason, Lavender agreed to go to Hogsmeade with him, and now he thinks he's God's gift or something. "Who are you going with, Dean?" Neville asked, sitting on his bed to put on his own shoes. "Ginny Weasley." "Oi, watch yourself." Harry smiled, opening his trunk and pulling out some clothes. "Her brothers are always looking for people to test their products on." Seamus and Neville both chuckled at Dean's sudden gulp of fear. Neville finished putting on his shoes and clapped Dean on the shoulder. He gave his dark-skinned roommate an encouraging smile. "Buck up, mate, all the boys in that family are scared stiff of the Weasley women." "I think you're okay. If I were you, I'd worry more about not making her angry. She's really good with that wand of hers." Harry didn't stop smiling as he showered and dressed. Neville waited for him to finish, and the two boys went down to the common room, where Hermione greeted them. "I was beginning to think we might miss breakfast," she said as she kissed Neville. "You look to be in a better mood." "Everything okay, then?" Harry smiled and thanked her for not pushing him to talk over the week. Hermione gave him a tight hug in return, and the three headed to the Great Hall. "Finally!" Tracy all but shouted as the Gryffindors joined them near the entrance to the Great Hall. "I'm really starving here, and Daphne didn't want to go in without you guys." "I wasn't keeping you here," Daphne said indignantly. "I just prefer to get my first kiss of the day without my breath tasting like porridge." Harry leaned in and kissed his girlfriend. "Minty." He grinned. Tracy made a disgusted face, while Daphne stuck her tongue out at her friend and the entire group entered the Great Hall for breakfast. They took up their usual spot halfway along the Gryffindor table. "So, Tracy," Hermione said as she poured milk onto her cereal. "Are you going to join us in Hogsmeade?" "I don't think so. I've made other plans." Tracy grinned, though she kept her eyes on her plate. "John Summers asked her out yesterday after Charms." Daphne grinned. "From Hufflepuff?" Hermione asked, glancing over to the Puffs table looking for the boy in question. John Summers was a 7th year, and a chaser on the Hufflepuff house team. He was tall, with light brown hair. "Yes, and he was very sweet about it," Tracy said defensively. "I'm surprised he got the question out with as much as he was stuttering." Daphne chuckled. "The poor boy looked like he was going to be sick." "You were making him nervous," Tracy remarked, glaring at her best friend. "I didn't even say anything to him," Daphne said defensively. "What are you two up to today?" Neville asked Harry, ignoring the two girls who were now locked in mock verbal combat. "I thought it'd be a good time to get some Christmas shopping done," Harry said, also ignoring the two Slytherin girls. "That's a really good idea," Hermione said, still looking up and down the Hufflepuff table. "Looking for something in particular, Granger?" Tracy said a little menacingly. Hermione turned back so fast Neville heard her neck crack. Her face red, Hermione began sputtering. Both Harry and Neville began snickering while Hermione tried to calm herself down. Both Daphne and Tracy simply stared at the bookworm with identical looks of curiosity. "I just want to make sure he's not shifty, or anything like that," Hermione finally said. "Thanks, but I learned my lesson, and I can take care of myself." "Sorry." Hermione blushed a bit. Tracy just grinned and shook her head. "It's fine, really. Besides, I don't think any of the Hufflepuffs are really capable of real shiftiness. He's really sweet, and I think this will be good for me. Besides, if he gets out of line, I'll just write to the twins again." Daphne and Hermione began laughing while Harry turned to look at Neville, who looked just as confused as he felt. The two boys knew that something bad had happened between Tracy and Blaise Zabinai, but they had yet to get the full story. The girls had kept that secret well hidden, and Harry knew that whatever it was, he was probably glad he didn't know. Still, he couldn't help but feel as if he should beat the daylights out of Blaise whenever he saw the boy. "What do you say we all meet at the Three Broomsticks for a late lunch?" Daphne asked. Everyone agreed that it sounded great, and the group of teens finished their breakfast, and together went down to the front gates, where Tracy met with her date for the day. Harry saw Summers looking at Harry, and he gave the older boy a polite nod. "I haven't seen her smile like that since summer," Daphne remarked as she watched Tracy as Filch ran a secrecy sensor over her friend. Tracy looked over at Daphne and Harry, who were awaiting their turn under Filch's sensor, and gave a bored look and rolled her eyes. "Are you ever going to tell me what happened between her and Blaise? I mean, he's still walking funny." Daphne grinned as she pictured Blaise. Though all the boils were gone, and he no longer suffered severe itching, the swelling had not fully subsided. He looked as if he were riding an invisible horse all the time. "It's not my story to tell." Daphne shrugged. "And I don't think she'll ever tell anyone else. Besides, she handled it just fine. In fact, last night, he actually came over to her in the common room and apologized." She thanked him for his apology, and I think they both learned very valuable lessons. Harry nodded, and held out his arms so Filch could check him over. Harry thought the old caretaker was rather enjoying this job, as his jowls were aquiver as he poked and prodded each student, looking for contraband. Soon enough, however, due largely to the fact they both remained silent through the process, Daphne and Harry were lined up for a carriage. Harry saw Seamus get poked rather hard by Filch when he made a few wise cracks. There was a thin layer of frost on the ground and the air had the crispness of coming winter, though there wasn't any snow yet. Daphne and Harry walked up and down the main street of Hogsmeade village, popping into stores and making purchases. They both managed to do a good deal of their Christmas shopping, getting gifts for all their friends. Daphne playfully tried to get Harry to reveal what he had in mind as a gift for her, but Harry wasn't going to give in. He simply smiled, and walked away, causing his girlfriend to chase after him, usually threatening him with injuries. It was extremely nice to carry on as normal teenagers who were not being trained to fight a war. Everywhere they looked, students and adults wandered about as if they hadn't a care in the world. It was as if there was no war coming, and no one's life was threatened. Harry and Daphne looked for all the world to be just what they were, two young people in love. Walking hand in hand, perusing the shops, stealing gentle kisses from each other. No one would look at these two young people and ever think they were soldiers in training, which is essentially what they were. "I want to get Astoria something really good," Daphne said as they stepped into a shop near the train platform on the edge of the village. "I think she's beginning to shed her tomboyishness, and I'd like to get her something feminine. Something to make her feel pretty." "How can she be a tomboy?" Harry asked, confused. "She always wears skirts during school." "Girls are complicated, Harry." Daphne smiled over her shoulder. Harry smiled at her comment and shrugged. He followed her into the shop and watched as she looked over necklaces and bracelets for her younger sister. "She's growing up. I think she even has a boyfriend. I've hardly seen her in the last couple of weeks. I think she's going to be a truly beautiful woman one day. Like her sister." Harry grinned, stepping closer to Daphne. "If she's lucky." Daphne chuckled. "What do you think of this?" Daphne held up a thin chain with a pendant of a unicorn. The horn of the beast was made of a brilliant blue stone. "Same color as his eyes, it looks like." "Harry, are you checking out my sister?" Daphne asked, not even bothering to hide her smirk. Harry shook his head, pulled her tightly to him and kissed her soundly. "Not on your life. There are earrings to match that piece," a middle-aged woman said. She was as tall as Daphne, with graying brown hair. She opened one of the cabinets and took a small box out and handed it to Daphne. Inside were two blue stones, shaped like the unicorn's horn. "Why don't you get the necklace, and I'll get the earrings?" Harry suggested. "That way she'll have the whole set. We can give it to her together." Daphne grinned. "I love that idea." The woman smiled sweetly as she took their money and bagged their purchases. Harry caught her looking at his scar a couple of times, but was thankful that she made no comments. This happened in most every shop they had patronied. The shop owner simply smiled politely at them until they were just about to leave. "Mr. Potter, I just wanted to tell you that my hopes are with you." Harry stopped and looked at the woman, who was still smiling at him. Her eyes were bright, and Harry gave her a respectful nod before leaving with Daphne. "I expect we might get more and more of that as things get darker." Daphne sighed, snuggling into Harry's side as they headed back towards the Three Broomsticks. "I think you're right. I just wish that people would rise up against him on their own. It would make things much easier. But fear's a hard weapon to overcome. And Voldemort is very good at using people's fear. It is his most powerful weapon. Not everyone is as brave as you." "I think you mean insane." Harry chuckled softly. "I did. I just didn't want to come right out and say it." but I think I must be insane as well, because I have no intention of letting you face this on your own. Daphne grinned, nudging Harry in the shoulder. Harry looked into her deep brown eyes and felt warmth spread throughout his body. He smiled and kissed her deeply. After a few moments, and a few catcalls from passers-by, the young couple broke their kiss. Daphne shivered slightly. I'm cold and hungry. I think it's time to go meet everybody. Harry was glad they had decided on a late lunch, as the Three Broomsticks wasn't nearly as crowded as it usually was. Though still overflowing with students from the school, as well as a good many older wizards and witches, Harry found it easier to maneuver through the crowd to look for his friends. Harry, Neville, Hermione, Tracy, and John Summers were at a table near the back of the tavern. Daphne and Harry joined them and took up their menus. Get enough stuff, Neville joked, as Harry set down the large bunch of bags he was carrying. We went to nearly every shop. Daphne smiled as she unwrapped her scarf. This isn't even half of it. A lot of it's been shrunk to fit with the rest. Harry sighed as he sat down and opened his coat. Why, Harry, boy. Harry looked up to see the new potions professor, Horace Slughorn, approaching the table. So good to see you outside of the classroom. I've been meaning to talk to you for a while now, but you have just been so busy. Listen, back in the old days, I would hold these little suppers for some of my more, shall we say, impressive students. I was wondering if you'd be interested in coming to one. Actually, all of you would be invited. Slughorn grinned as he glanced around the table. It is so good to see the houses intermingling. Never understood why Gryffindors and Slytherins had such a hard time getting along. So, what do you say to joining me at one of my supper parties? Harry shrugged. Sounds okay to me, sir. I'd be delighted, Professor. Hermione smiled, as did Neville, though he looked a little nervous. Both Daphne and Tracy nodded as well, while John Summers simply smiled, not sure if the invitation was extended to him as well, as Slughorn had pointedly ignored him. Oh, jolly good. I shall send you all invitations with the time and date of the next one. Incidentally, I'm planning big Christmas bash. I'd start looking into dress robes if you haven't got any. Really smashing time for everyone in attendance, and you never know who will be there. Well, I'm off, have a lot of essays to read tonight. Enjoy yourselves. My mum told me about Slughorn's Christmas parties. Tracy said after the rotund professor had waddled off. She got to go to one as someone's date, and she said she met some pretty famous people there. He's really well connected. Dumbledore told me he's famous for making introductions, and helping people get started in their careers. Harry said. I like him. Neville said, shrugging his shoulders. He seems all right. Better than Snape, at least. Harry agreed. The 16s enjoyed their lunch, while talking idly about the coming Quidditch season. Harry felt a little bad for Tracy's date, as he no doubt felt like an outsider. Harry did his best to try and be welcoming, but the poor Hufflepuff seemed far too nervous all through the meal. After they had eaten, and paid their bill, Harry, Daphne, Hermione, and Neville said goodbye to Tracy and John, who weren't finished with their date, and headed back up to the castle. I feel bad for John, Hermione said as she snuggled into Neville's embrace. He looked so lost and scared sitting with us. Are we really that difficult to approach? Neville asked, looking over Hermione's head at Harry and Daphne. Well, we did fight Death Eaters in the Ministry last year. Daphne smiled. It does kind of make us a bit intimidating. They joked a bit more, and wondered if Tracy and John would become a couple, or if it had been too soon for the Hufflepuff to attempt to join their group. as he obviously had trouble even talking with them. They all seemed to agree that whomever Tracy chose to date, it would probably be best for her to wait until the relationship was stronger before inviting him into their circle. At least then she'd know if he was going to be a decent guy and all. Hermione smiled. "Hey, that's Millie," Daphne said, pointing ahead to three girls who looked to be arguing over something. "I think that's Megan Jones and Lisa Turpin," Hermione said, identifying the other two girls. "I wonder what's going on." The group walked closer to the three girls. As they drew closer, they could begin to hear what they were saying. "Just tell me who gave it to you," Lisa was saying. Megan simply shook her head, and clutched a package to her chest. "I just need to get it to Dumbledore," Mandy said firmly. "This is just too weird, Megan," Millie said, folding her arms. "Why won't you tell us who gave it to you, and why do you have to deliver it?" "I just have to, all right? Can we please stop talking about it?" Megan said, getting irritated. "No. Let's look and see what it is," Millie said, reaching out to take the package. "Back off," Megan shouted, sidestepping Millie's attempt to get the package away from her. As Megan dodged out of Millicent's reach, Lisa grabbed hold of the package. Megan fought against her friend, trying to reclaim the mysterious package. The two girls struggled against each other, both shouting at the other to let go. "I don't think you should take this to anyone," Lisa said as Megan fought against her. "You don't even know what it is." "Just let go," Megan shouted, her face twisting into a look of anger. Harry and his friends watched, frozen with astonishment as they watched the tussle. Millicent shouted at her two friends to stop fighting, but Megan seemed to grow more and more agitated. "Stop it!" Hermione shouted, stepping forward trying to come between fighting the girls. Suddenly, the package ripped, and something flew into the air. Every one of them seemed to stop and watch the glittering object as it sailed through the air. Millicent took a few steps and reached out to catch the shimmering object, just as Megan realized the package had torn open. Desperate to reclaim her prize, Megan pushed Lisa to the ground and ran to intercept Millicent. Unfortunately, thanks to Millie's height, the Slytherin was able to snag the flying object out of the air nearly as easily as Harry caught snitches on the Quidditch pitch. That's when things turned simply horrifying. The moment Millie's hand clasped around the unidentified object, a wave of magic knocked everyone to the ground, while throwing Millie herself into the air. There was a gut-wrenching shriek as Millie's face contorted into a mask of severe pain. Millie shrieked in agony as her body began writhing in very painful ways. She fell back to the ground, her eyes rolled into the back of her head, her breath coming in shallow gasps and blood coming from her nose and ears. "Millie!" Megan screamed, running over to her friend. Lisa was also on her feet, and she began to reach for the object in Millie's hand. "Do not touch THA." Hagrid's voice boomed as the half-giant came racing towards them. "Step away from now." Harry and the others watched as Hagrid bent down and scooped up the girl. He looked at her face, and Harry could see the part of Hagrid's face not hidden by hair go pale. He turned to Harry and nodded towards the object lying on the ground. "Harry, grab THA, but don't touch it with your skin. Use your scarf and pick it up, then come with me." Harry did as he was told, and wrapped his hand in his scarf before bending down to pick up what he discovered was a very ornate-looking necklace. The others gathered around him to see what had caused all the commotion. "A necklace?" Daphne looked confused. "Don't touch it!" Hagrid shouted over his shoulder. Daphne jumped a bit at Hagrid's shout, and turned to see Millicent's face hanging over Hagrid's arm. She had gone deathly pale, and her eyes were still rolled up in her skull. She was whimpering lightly, and shaking horribly. Hagrid brought them all to the hospital wing where Madame Pomfrey took the Slytherin girl behind a curtain to begin trying to heal her. A few moments later, Professor McGonagall appeared and listened to Hagrid's tale before guiding the other children to her office and sending a flow message to Professor Snape to join her in her office. "Would someone please explain what happened?" "We were in the Three Broomsticks," Lisa Turpin began. "Megan went to the loo, and when she came back she said we had to go, and she had this package in her hands. She looked a little weird." Megan looked lost and confused. She kept shaking her hand as if trying to clear her thoughts. "I don't remember coming back from the bathroom," she whispered. "Millie and I kept asking her about the package, but she refused to tell us anything. We wanted to see what was inside, and we tried to get it from her. It tore open, and that necklace came out." Lisa pointed to the necklace that now lay on McGonagall's desk. "Millie caught it, and then we all got knocked to the ground. Hermione jumped in. Then she got lifted up, and it looked like she was in real pain." "Who were you supposed to take this to?" McGonagall asked Mandy. The young Ravenclaw shook her head, tears beginning to fall from her eyes. "I don't remember." "Professor Dumbledore," Lisa said, her voice a near whisper. McGonagall actually flinched. She stared at Mandy for a few moments before she seemed to regain herself. Mandy looked as if she were barely holding herself in check. Tears were slipping down her cheeks while she waited for McGonagall to pass judgment, while Lisa simply stared in horror at her friend, wondering what exactly had happened. "Where do you four come into this?" McGonagall asked, looking to Harry and the others. "We showed up just as they started fighting over the package," Daphne said, looking McGonagall in the eye. The Transfiguration teacher nodded just as Professor Snape entered. "You needed to see me." "Yes, Severus. I need you to take a look at this necklace. It injured a student quite badly. Miss Bulstrode, in fact." Snape swept into the room, pulling his wand and casting a couple of spells over the necklace. His face took on a very grim demeanor as he interpreted what his diagnostic spells revealed. "I take it that Miss Bulstrode was not the intended victim?" Snape asked, looking to McGonagall. "It was meant for the headmaster." Harry couldn't see Snape's face, but he saw Snape's shoulders tighten noticeably. He felt Daphne's hand squeeze his and knew that she had seen it as well. "I believe that Miss Jones was used to bring it to him." Harry and the others all looked at Meghan, who suddenly looked simultaneously relieved and horrified. "I shall take this immediately to my office and see if I can't work out how it was cursed. Perhaps it will help Madame Pomfrey with treatment," Snape said, taking Harry's scarf and wrapping the necklace within it, before dashing out of the Transfiguration teacher's office. "Miss Jones, I am going to take you to the hospital wing to be looked over. The rest of you may go," McGonagall said, taking Mandy by the shoulder and leading her away. "Who'd want to hurt Dumbledore?" Hermione asked when they were away from McGonagall's office. "I can think of someone," Harry said pointedly. "I seriously doubt that Voldemort was hiding out in the girls' lavatory in the Three Broomsticks." Hermione gave a wry look. "Obviously he had an agent there," Neville said. "But it does seem rather underhanded and nothing like what you know who would do. It doesn't make a lot of sense really." "You're right," Daphne said, looking rather contemplative. "But it's clear that he's got people working for him in the school." "You're talking about Draco again, aren't you?" Hermione asked. "He wasn't even there today." "That doesn't mean he didn't have someone helping him." "Hermione, you haven't spent as much time with him as I have been forced to. Magically speaking, he's pretty feeble, I'll admit, but he does have a very clever mind, especially if his ego doesn't get in the way. He could have put this whole thing together. So how do we prove it? Harry asked. We don't even know for sure that it was him, Hermione pointed out. We can't go around making accusations without proof. So we get some, Daphne said firmly. Draco was a mess. He was pacing back and forth in front of that stupid cabinet he was supposed to be repairing, and running his hands through his sleek blonde hair in frustration. He had screwed up. He should have been patient, or waited, or done one of a million things differently. If he had just been patient at least, then maybe the right person would be dead instead of Millicent Bulstrode. It had been announced at dinner that Millicent had died due to coming in contact with a cursed object that had been intended for someone else. Professor McGonagall had made the announcement, and warned the students not to accept anything from strange people, and to not venture anywhere alone. Draco knew exactly what had happened, though he couldn't figure out how Millicent had come into contact with the necklace. It had been wrapped, or at least it should have been. Where had things gone wrong? He wondered. It wasn't his intention for anyone to get hurt. He needed someone to get the necklace into the school and deliver it to Dumbledore, who as it turned out was gone for the weekend. But things had not gone according to his plan, and now, he was responsible for the death of Millicent Bulstrode, a pureblood from a very prominent family, though not as powerful as his own. He had never intended for anyone other than Dumbledore to get hurt, much less killed. Okay, so maybe he wanted to see Potter writhing in pain, sure, but did he really want him dead? Yes, he hated Harry Potter. He hated Potter more than anyone or anything, and thought he gave all wizards a bad name. But did he truly want him dead? After all, with Potter dead, who was he going to have to torment and belittle? Draco sat heavily on a broken trunk and stared at that accursed cabinet. He began to wonder why he really hated Potter. Where did those feelings come from? Jealousy. Was he, Draco Malfoy, one of the richest, and best-looking wizards in all of England, actually jealous of Harry Potter? A half-blood whose only claim to fame was some disgusting scar on his head? The answer was a very clear yes. Potter was so much more than Draco could ever hope to be. He was powerful, magically speaking, and he was more than talented on the Quidditch field. Draco knew the Potter family was quite wealthy, and that Harry would likely someday end up as Minister of Magic or something equally distinctive, all while Draco was making back-alley deals and being as detested as his father had been. Draco slammed his fists into the side of his head as he imagined just what Millicent went through before her death. He knew the curse the necklace carried would make whomever touched it suffer a most horrible death. He had gone to great lengths to get that fool Borgin to send it to his agent in Hogsmeade. It had been easy to secure his agent, thanks to the use of the Imperious Curse. The plan was solid, and yet, somehow, everything had gone wrong, and it was Millicent who had died instead of Dumbledore. Draco never cared much for the rather large girl, but she was a pure-blood, and a Slytherin, and in Draco's book, that counted for something. Draco couldn't help but wish that he had skived off his detention from McGonagall and just done the deed himself. After all, had he succeeded, his banishment would have been temporary. Once the Dark Lord took power, he would have Draco reinstated at the school. The thought of the Dark Lord made Draco shiver. He was failing, and when the Christmas holidays came, he would have to stand before his master and report his failures. And then, just as other Death Eaters before him, he would suffer his punishments. It was then that Draco realized he was in over his head now. He stared at the cabinet again, and wanted nothing more than to blast it to pieces. He wanted to run and never look back. Forget the Dark Lord, and forget Harry Potter. Yes, he could run away and no one would ever find him. His family had friends in France that might help him, and he had enough gold on him to make it to France easily. After all, what did he owe the Dark Lord, anyway? Sure, he'd been promised rewards, but was the Dark Lord going to actually give him what he wanted? And did he truly desire those things anymore? Draco stood up and was about to head back to his dorm to gather his things and sneak out of the school when an image appeared to his mind's eye. His mother's face, looking at him while standing in the doorway of his bedroom. Her eyes so full of concern and worry. He had hated her for those looks, but now he finally understood. She was afraid for him. If he ran, the Dark Lord would kill her, without hesitation. That thought froze him. His father was a bastard, and deserved whatever punishment he got, but his mother was a kind and wonderful woman, who'd done all she could to protect him and make him a better man than his father, and he was just going to abandon her. No, he whispered. He turned back to the cabinet, and took off his robe, pulling out his wand. He was not going to let his mother be killed because he failed. He owed her more than he could ever repay. His life. His happiness. She had stood by him while his father simply tolerated his existence. Sure, his father had power and standing. Once. But his mother was so much stronger, and smarter than his father, and now she needed him to do what the Dark Lord ordered, or her life was forfeit. He had the power to save her. He was going to do it. He was going to repair this cabinet so the Death Eaters could enter the castle. He would kill Albus Dumbledore, removing the last obstacle to the Dark Lord's rise. Then, and only then, would Draco run. He would take his mother, and leave the country for good. You can't be serious. Severus Snape shouted at a very stoic-looking Albus Dumbledore. We have no proof that Draco was involved. We don't even have enough to warrant the administration of Veritaserum. And you've told me yourself that the Ministry is infected with Death Eaters in high places. We haven't a choice. Dumbledore said, turning away and looking truly upset. He had returned to the school after spending the weekend following a lead about one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, only to learn that a young girl had died from coming into contact with a cursed object. He had already spoken to Hagrid, and Professor McGonagall, and learned that Harry and some of his friends had witnessed the incident. He'd learned much more once he had summoned Snape to his office. Dumbledore knew that Draco Malfoy was behind the incident, though he was unsure how he had pulled it off, as according to McGonagall, Draco had been in detention with her most of the day. It was very clear that Draco had someone in Hogsmeade working for him, or with him. But a student is dead. I don't like it any more than you do, Albus. He's my godson after all, but we have a responsibility. Do you think I've forgotten? Albus roared, stunning Snape into silence. The old man looked quite scary when he was angry, his normally twinkling blue eyes were dark, and he was radiating power, crackling the air around them. Do you honestly think I get some sort of thrill out of letting a potential murderer go free? You heard the story, it was an accident. And we will be very hard-pressed to prove it. Miss Bulstrode was not the intended target, and if any number of things had gone differently, no one would have been hurt. He's desperate, and his actions show that. What we need to worry about is what he does next, because if he does succeed in hurting someone, he will have to pay for his crime. We can still save him, Severus. Albus, I appreciate that you think the boy can be saved, but you truly don't know him as I do. With Lucius Malfoy as a father, I'm honestly surprised that no one has been hurt before. Snape said, his tone lowering. He sat down, and stared at the headmaster. I can't even get him to listen to me. He's constantly skiving off classes, and no one has any idea where he disappears to or what he's doing. I even used legilimency on his two thugs, and all I got was that they stood guard on the 7th floor. The 7th floor. Dumbledore looked over his shoulder at his defense teacher. Usually using polyjuice and disguised as first-year girls. Dumbledore smirked. If we don't reach out to him soon, his friends might very well end the problem for us. Though, that information may prove useful. Funny. Snape groaned, pinching the bridge of his long nose. How long are you going to let this carry on? Until the Dark Lord wins. I've already told you that his agents are nearly in place. Now that Scrimgeour has taken office, it won't be long. The ministry will fall, and then the Dark Lord will focus all of his efforts on you and the boy. I have already set my affairs in order. The Christmas holidays are near, and there are only a handful of places left in the castle in which to search. I shall have Harry helping me. You still want me to look after Draco? Of course. It will be a very good time to show that you are not trying to. How did you put it? Steal his thunder. Dumbledore's patented smile began to return. Snape rolled his black eyes and snorted. Typical teenage pride. The boy is going to learn exactly what it means to serve him. Which is why you need to be there. My cover story is in place so Lord Voldemort will not require you to be here. Perhaps you could convince Narcissa to give the boy guidance. Any help we could get to make him see reason would be most helpful. He didn't listen to her during the summer, why would he now? He's responsible for the death of a student. Though he's likely not showing it, it's likely he's very upset by it. We need to press on that, before someone else is killed, possibly by Draco himself. Snape stood up and bowed his head slightly. I still think you're wrong on this. It is my deepest hope that it is you who is wrong, old friend. November had passed into December, and Christmas was creeping up quickly upon the student population. All around them, the castle had transformed into its usual Yuletime wonderland, and there was an air of holiday cheeriness throughout the halls of Hogwarts. Except for a small handful of students who were still mourning the loss of one of their friends. Mandy Brocklehurst had left Hogwarts altogether, unable to deal with her own guilt in the role she played in her good friend's death. Another person who was having trouble with their guilt was Pansy Parkinson. Daphne noted that Pansy was often seen alone. Tracy had heard rumors that Pansy was being shunned by everyone in Slytherin House, and had not even spoken to Draco Malfoy all year. I kind of feel bad for her, Daphne said to Harry late one evening while they were in the library. No one should have to be alone. Harry agreed. Maybe we could introduce her to Luna. Maybe they'll find some kind of common ground and build some kind of friendship, Daphne said. Harry began to laugh, and Daphne couldn't help herself. I would give anything to be a fly on the wall for any conversation they had. Harry grinned, wiping at his eyes. The two teens chuckled a bit longer before settling down again and going back to their essays. McGonagall had assigned them a very long essay, and the two teens had got started right away. Silence fell upon them for a few minutes before Daphne put her quill down and stared at Harry. It took a few minutes before Harry felt her eyes on him and looked up. What? I'm just wondering when you're going to ask me, Daphne said, folding her hands on the table. Ask you what? Harry asked, now confused. Daphne sighed and shook her head. Slughorn's Christmas party. Are you going to ask me to go with you? What? I thought we were already going together. Why do I need to ask? Oh Harry. Just because we're dating doesn't mean that you don't have to ask. A girl appreciates when you show her how considerate you are. You can't just assume that because we're dating means we go to everything together. What if someone else asked me? What? Who? Harry asked, looking a bit upset. It's just an example, Harry. I just don't want you taking me for granted. Harry calmed down, and mulled over what his girlfriend had said. He sighed and looked over at her expectant face. I'm sorry. Daphne, would you do me the honor of allowing me to escort you to Slughorn's party? I would love to. Daphne grinned. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. And thank you for asking. Harry shook his head. He was sure he would never understand girls. Thank the gods he had a truly patient and understanding girlfriend. Hey guys. Neville said as he and Hermione sat down at the table and began pulling out their own assignments. What's going on? Harry finally asked me to Slughorn's party. Daphne smiled, and Hermione snorted. Oi, Harry, the party's tomorrow. What took you so long? Neville asked, looking at Harry pitifully. I didn't know I was supposed to ask. Harry's shoulders slumped. Clueless. Hermione said, and Harry balled up a scrap of parchment and threw it at his friend, who easily dodged the projectile. You could have told me. What, and miss an opportunity to see you embarrass yourself. I think Tracy's been rubbing off on you. Neville said warily. You've gotten very Slytherin-like. And what's wrong with that? Daphne asked, her eyes narrowed threateningly. Neville looked to Harry, who was keeping his head bent towards his essay. Let him be, Daphne. He's only a boy, and doesn't always realize when he's being stupid. The two girls began to giggle while Neville gave a relieved sigh. Harry chuckled along, though he kept his face bent towards his assignment. Slughorn's Christmas party was the talk of the school. There were only a handful of invitations sent out, but many people were trying to get dates with those who had been invited. Rumors were flying about some of the guests who might be in attendance. From the captain of the Holy Head Harpies, and the bassist for the Weird Sisters, to the Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour himself. The night of the party found both Harry and Neville giving themselves a final look in the mirror before heading down to the common room where Hermione stood waiting patiently. My, don't you both look quite dashing? Thank you, milady. Harry grinned, and gave a low bow. You also look very fetching. More than fetching. Neville smiled, stepping forward and taking his girlfriend's hand. He gave a sweet smile and kissed the back of her hand, causing Hermione to blush lightly. I think delicious is quite appropriate here. Stop it. Hermione said, playfully slapping his shoulder. We should head down to the entrance hall. No, you two go on ahead. I'll go meet Daphne and we'll see you there. Harry smiled as he led them out of the portrait hole. Are you sure? Neville asked. We don't mind going with you. Hermione smiled. No, it's okay. Go on. Harry grinned, and waved as he took the stairs to meet his date. He stepped off the stairs to find the entrance hall somewhat empty. He began to head to the doorway that led to the dungeons and the Slytherin common room. He was about to step through when Daphne appeared. Harry's jaw dropped. Daphne's dark brown hair had been swept up into an elegant knot, and she was dressed in a very stunning dark green dress which ended just above her knees, with matching heeled sandals. She had a simple black shawl draped over her arms to finish the outfit. Harry's stare caused her to blush a bit as she approached him. Wow. Harry stammered. Thank you. Daphne said a bit shyly. All I ever get to see you in is your uniform, so this is just wow. Harry smiled as he took her arm. Well, maybe this summer, I'll correct that oversight, provided you give me a reason to dress this way. Daphne smiled seductively. Done. Harry smiled as he led her back to the staircase. "Are you going home for Christmas?" Daphne asked. "We've never talked about it." "I realized that while I was getting ready for tonight. We've been so busy with everything, we barely had any time for anything short of homework." "I know, and I'm sorry for that. I'm staying here for the holidays. I'm going to help Dumbledore look for Horcruxes." "Good, so I won't be alone." "What? I thought you were going home." Harry looked surprised. "Don't you remember? My family is supposed to have denounced me. Astoria's pretty upset by it. She wants me to come home for Christmas. She says it's going to be horrible without me. I think it's because she won't have anyone to terrorize, but if I do, it'll ruin everything we've built up and put them in danger." "I had totally forgotten," Harry admitted. "I get to see Astoria and talk to her every day. It's easy to forget that you're supposed to be an outcast." "I'm going to miss it. Christmas is always so much fun at my house. We always get to bake loads of cookies and pies and stuff. Dad makes this holiday punch and it's so good. He only makes it during the holidays. This'll be the first one I ever miss." Daphne sighed, looking a bit forlorn. "Well, I've heard that nearly everyone else is going to be gone, so we'll have the whole castle to ourselves, pretty much. I know it won't be as good as going home, but maybe we can make it less horrible just by being together. It would be very nice to have you all to myself with no classes or private lessons or anything like that to interrupt us. We really need some time together." "Private time?" She gave him a suggestive smile and waggled her eyebrows. Harry felt himself getting hot, and tugged at his collar. He gave her a smile and she grinned as she pushed him against a wall and kissed him very deeply. Harry clutched her waist and held her tightly as he returned the kiss with enthusiasm. "We should get to the party." Daphne smiled as she broke the kiss. "We can continue this a bit later, sooner if the party turns out to be boring." Harry could only smile stupidly as Daphne led him towards the party. Slughorn had found a very large unused classroom on the 5th floor in which to hold his party. Upon entering, the couple had their picture taken under an arch decorated with holly and twinkling fairies, who were all apparently enjoying what looked to be very tiny cookies. "This is really ostentatious," Daphne said, looking around the room at the gaudy decorations and rather loud colors. There was a large Christmas tree in the corner, which looked as if someone had just thrown decorations on it. "Does it really surprise you?" Harry asked as he took in the decorations. There were several house elves, wearing their usually Hogwarts aprons, as well as little bow ties. They were carrying platters with crystal goblets filled with what looked to be punch as well as all kinds of snack food. "Why, Harry, so glad you made it, boy!" Horace Slughorn bellowed as he approached Harry and Daphne. He was wearing a very festive-looking smoking jacket and matching hat. He gave Harry a very firm handshake, and bowed in front of Daphne. "There are quite a few people who'd I'd truly like you to meet." Taking Harry by the arm, Slughorn practically dragged Harry through the crowds of people milling about. Daphne only barely clung to her date as he was pulled bodily through the party, nearly falling over in her heeled shoes. This is Eldred Wurple. He wrote that fascinating book Blood Brothers, My Life Amongst Vampires. And this fellow is Sanguini. He is, in fact, a vampire." Eldred Wurple was a short balding man with thick glasses perched on a short, bulbous nose. He was dressed in a fine-looking blue suit, and was busy examining a pastry as Slughorn pulled Harry up. Eldred looked over his thick glasses at Harry and gave a predatory smile. Immediately Harry felt on edge as the man offered a rather large hand. Harry shook it politely, but couldn't help feeling that he needed to wash it as soon as possible. Sanguini, on the other hand, was quite tall, and very pale, with soft pale blue eyes, which were focused on two girls that Harry thought belonged to Hufflepuff. His blonde hair was long, and slicked back into a very aristocratic-looking ponytail. He offered his hand as well, and Harry was fascinated by the coolness of the vampire's skin, and his thin fingers. "It is indeed a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Potter. Your story is of course very well known, but I for one feel that it is full of holes. You are quite a mystery, one the public would be delighted to unravel. You could make quite a few galleons for yourself by allowing someone write your story. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I really have no interest in opening myself up in such a way. The public already knows much more about me than I would like." Wurple looked rather insulted, but said nothing. Slughorn gave a great belly laugh and clapped Harry on the back. The rotund professor then guided Harry to a younger-looking woman, that Harry thought he recognized. "Gweena Jones, who you will of course know as the captain of the Holyhead Harpies." Slughorn smiled broadly as Harry shook hands with the Quidditch captain. Gweena was a very slim woman, who stood a few inches taller than Slughorn, and was dressed in a slim black dress, her dark hair pulled into a simple braid. "It's an honor." Harry smiled. "This is Daphne Greengrass, my girlfriend." "A delight." Daphne smiled, shaking Gweenag's hand. "You are one very lucky young woman." Gweenag smiled. "From all I've read about this young man, half the witches in this castle would kill to be on his arm." "Oh, it isn't luck." Daphne grinned. "I simply made the effort to get his attention." Gweenag laughed, as did Slughorn, while Harry bent and kissed Daphne's cheek. "Well, I should expect to be facing you on the field within the next couple of years. You're all the scouts seem to be talking about this year. If my team wasn't exclusively for women, I'd be pushing our management to make you an offer. That last match was something to watch, and your performance in particular." Harry blushed a bit, surprised to learn that the woman standing in front of him had seen his last game, the first of the season as it was. Harry waved the compliment off. "I'm nothing without my team." "Excellent point, and very humble of you. I understand you are the captain of your team this year," Gweenag said, taking a sip of her drink. "I am. It's really a lot of work, but I enjoy it a lot." "Do you think you'll take the championship this year?" Harry shrugged. "We've had truly great teams since I've come to Hogwarts, but having a great team isn't everything. We can practice and work as hard as possible, but another team might prove better. I hope we can pull off a win, but who really knows?" "I'm truly impressed." Gweenag nodded. "Most captains would simply claim their superiority and be done with it. I wish you all the best." "Thank you." Harry smiled. Slughorn had ambled off, presumably to speak with another of his famous guests. Harry took the opportunity and excused himself while he led Daphne away to find Hermione and Neville. They found a rather quiet corner where Harry stopped and turned to face the room, partly to watch for his friends, but also to watch for Slughorn. "Look at you hobnobbing with famous Quidditch players." Daphne smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Harry simply shook his head. "Have you forgotten Victor? He's probably the most famous person I know, and he's actually a friend." "I know. I was trying to loosen you up. You've had a death grip on my hand since we got here." Harry looked chagrined, and released her hand. Daphne gave him a warm smile and slipped her arms around his neck. She kissed his lips softly, and looked into eyes as she spoke to him. "Relax, you're doing fine. Just remember to breathe, and pretend to be interested in whatever people are saying to you. You're already doing better than Slughorn in my book. That oaf didn't bother to introduce me to anyone." That's the other thing. I felt like I was on display or something. Harry said, looking over Daphne's shoulder to see where Slughorn had gone to. Hey guys. Hermione was leading Neville towards them. Neville was looking over his shoulder at Sanguini, who was still hungrily watching the two Hufflepuff girls, who seemed to be enjoying the attention. Can you believe Slughorn let a real vampire in here? If anyone gets hurt. Neville said, still not taking his eyes off the creature. Hopefully he fed before he came here. Hermione said, and then seemed to remember what exactly vampires fed on. Her face flushed, and she moved closer to Neville, who wrapped his arms around her protectively. Is he really that dangerous? Harry asked, looking to Daphne. Or are we just looking for threats because of everything we've been preparing for? A bit of both, I think. Daphne shrugged. They can be dangerous, but it also depends on their original temperament, and as Hermione pointed out, if they've fed recently. I think he might be okay, but I hope someone is keeping an eye on him. Still, at least it isn't a banshee, or something. Daphne finished, looking around them. Can we get something to drink? I'm sorry. Harry said. Why don't you wait here, I'll go get you something. Very gentlemanly of you. Daphne smiled. Harry smiled back and kissed her hand, causing her smile to widen. Neville slipped away from Hermione and he and Harry went to fetch drinks for their ladies. How's he holding up? Hermione asked. Just as you said he would. Brave face, but going insane inside. I thought he was going to squeeze my hand off. He relaxed a bit when he was talking to the Quidditch woman, but I'm guessing it was because it was about Quidditch. Slughorn was waiting at the door for Harry to show up. He asked Neville and I if we knew where Harry was when we got here. He practically had people waiting around him. Oh no. What? Daphne asked with concern. Hermione simply pointed to where Harry was. Slughorn had apparently spotted Harry and Neville, and had surrounded him with a number of well-known people to meet. Oh gods! What is wrong with that man? Daphne said, beginning to go to Harry's aid when Hermione grabbed her arm. Hold it a second. We can't be rude. But give it a minute or two, then we can sweep in and reclaim our men, and no one will argue with us. Even Slughorn won't be able to deny two amazing-looking witches time with their wizards. Daphne had to grin at Hermione's arched eyebrow and her words. Both she and Hermione did look stunning, if they did say so themselves, and one thing Daphne knew was that no one would dare come between a well-dressed witch and her man. She'd seen her mother tear her father away from boring old wizards at parties hundreds of times, though she'd never understood it at the time. Now it made sense. Her mother would sweep in and rescue her father from being bored to tears, or worse, bullied into something he didn't want any part of. Her mother was a hero. The two girls waited, keeping their eyes locked on their men for a full 5 minutes before marching, though they made the act look elegant and sophisticated. And excusing themselves and begging forgiveness for stealing back their men. I love you. Harry sighed when they were far enough away from the crowd that Slughorn had surrounded him with. I was dying over there. Well, I was thirsty, and you had my drink. Besides, it's my job to swoop in and save you from boredom. Daphne smiled as she sipped her glass. It was something bubbly with a very cherry taste to it. It was quite good, she thought. Way better than your typical pumpkin juice. Get off of me. Harry and the others turned, as did most of the crowd, as a rather triumphant-looking Filch stormed into the room, pulling a struggling Draco Malfoy behind him. Harry noticed that Malfoy looked very drawn, and his face looked as if the skin had been pulled tight over his skull. Pardon me, Professor. Filch growled. But I caught this boy out past curfew. He said he was invited to your party, but couldn't produce the invitation. Slughorn looked a little confused as he looked at Draco. He opened his mouth to speak, but Draco cut him off. All right, so I was gate crashing. Now get your filthy squib hands off of me before I remove them myself. Draco struggled and squirmed until Filch lost his grip. From out of nowhere, Professor Snape swept over, and took Draco by the shoulder. I didn't know Snape was here. Harry whispered. From the shrugs and looks of surprise, none of his friends had noticed their former potions master either. As this young man is a member of my house, I shall see to it he is properly punished for being out of bounds. Snape said, turning Draco back towards the door. Oh, come now, Severus. It is a Christmas party, no one can blame him for wanting to join the festivities. Be that as it may, he has broken the rules, and I know for a fact he has quite a lot of homework to be catching up on. Snape said over his shoulder as Draco left. Come with me. Daphne said, grabbing hold of Harry's hand. At the door, she stopped and slipped her shoes off her feet, and led Harry out into the hall, placing a finger on her lips as she looked at Harry. Harry was confused as to why they were following Snape and Draco, until he saw them slip into a classroom. Daphne and Harry came to the door, and each of them placed their ears to the door. Reckless. If you'd just let me help you, I could. No. Draco shouted. Harry and Daphne looked to each other with confusion. He gave this to me. I have to be the one to do it. Draco's voice sounded shaky. And what progress do you have to report? You're going to stand before him tomorrow night, and what do you have to show after all this time? Tell me, because all I see is one dead girl, who was a pure blood. He will not be very understanding. That wasn't supposed to happen. Draco said fiercely. I don't know how she even got a hold of it. No kidding. You're treading on very dangerous ground, boy. You aren't meant to succeed. You were never meant to. That's why you were selected. You are punishment for your father's failure. Even you can't be so blind to see that. I'm better than my father could ever hope to be. Draco said, but Harry heard a bit of doubt in his rival's voice. He looked again to Daphne, who mirrored his confusion. Draco had never ever sounded unsure of himself. If you are truly going to succeed, it won't be with some silly cursed necklace. I want you to accomplish your task, Draco. I do not want to see you hurt, or killed. You're starting to sound like my mother. She thinks I'm incapable too. That is not true. Damn it, why are you so stubborn? I only want to help you. Help me? Are you sure? Are you sure that you don't want to turn me over to the Aurors? I've been warned about you. No one trusts you, you know. They all told me to watch out for you. They all think you're going to betray him. Draco accused, though he didn't sound very confident. Harry wished he could see Draco's face. He wondered if he was trying to sneer at Snape in an effort to appear more powerful or something. I don't care what anyone else thinks. The only opinion that matters is his, and he trusts me. It is why I am one of his most trusted, as you will be if you let me help you. Forget it, Snape. Draco said. Harry and Daphne heard him coming closer to the door, and quickly ran across the hall and slipped into a dark alcove. They each peered out as the door opened and Draco stormed out. A moment later, Snape swept out of the room, and followed after Draco. Do you think there's any chance at all they weren't talking about Voldemort? Daphne asked. No. Harry said simply. So he is marked. Daphne sighed heavily, her shoulders falling slightly. Sounds like it, but until we can prove it, he's going to keep doing whatever it is he's doing. Harry whispered. Harry, I'm really afraid for him. Harry turned to see Daphne's face, lit by the moon. She looked really afraid, and Harry wrapped his arms around his girlfriend. There's no question that he's a bastard, but he actually sounded frightened. I think he's in over his head. I mean, I don't think I will ever like him at all, but no one deserves to be set up to die. And he's so egotistical that he'd never realize that that's what's happening. You heard Snape. I know. Harry nodded. He's not meant to succeed. Harry looked down the hallway where both Snape and Draco had gone, and wondered what exactly Draco was supposed to be doing. Whatever it was, Harry knew it would not end well for anyone. They needed to do whatever they could to stop him, and see that he faced justice. Please like and subscribe.